What's up? Welcome back to Nowstalgia. Dave here with a review of Hitman, the new romantic comedy film out now on Netflix from Richard Linklater, starring Glen Powell and Adria Arjona. Hitman premiered back at Venice and Toronto last year, then sold to Netflix for 20 million. Big steal, you could say, for Netflix, taking this away from traditional studios, denying this movie a theatrical release, and that's especially on the mind now following the Glen Powell train that continues to roll along. Of course, Glen Powell, a part of Anyone But You, last year really catapulting him into the full A-list stardom after the kind of steady momentum he has had with Top Gun Maverick and even something like Everybody Wants Some, also from Richard Linklater. And I think Anyone But You getting a big audience, being a big hit, Hitman surely will be a big hit, a big movie on Netflix, leading into Twisters starring Glen Powell this July, is really happening for the guy. And I think it's really exciting overall because we kind of been tabbing him as a star, as a talented leading man for some time. I mean, I've been a Glen Powell fan for a while. I really first remembered watching him on Scream Queens, the Ryan Murphy series, where I thought he was so good. And of course, I also loved him and Set It Up. And he is great and everybody wants him, as everyone knows. But Hitman is unsurprisingly a great use of Glen Powell's talents. Now, if you look at a lot of the marketing, a lot of the trailers, you see Glen Powell assuming a bunch of different roles, wearing different costumes and wigs, doing different voices. It's kind of a fun way to kind of reflect on the status that's kind of been bestowed on Glen as a leading man. Nonetheless, that's not really the crux of the movie. The core engine of Hitman has to be the crackling, excellent chemistry between Glen Powell and Adria Arjona. And really, this is the coming out party, the breakout for Adria Arjona, who's been in a lot of big profile things and supporting roles, but this is a great performance from her. It's honestly a harder role than Glen. Glen is very consistent at being a charming leading man. Hitman, though, has just enough noir to it, has just enough twists and turns, and it has kind of that Richard Linklater charm and sensibility. This was just a really good time, especially about 30 minutes in once Arjona enters the film. Right off the jump, though, you get that setup, which I think is a pretty strong setup. You have Glen Powell playing Gary Johnson, this college professor who also kind of stumbles into contract work with the local police department, where he assumes the identity of a fake hitman and essentially is basically entrapping would-be criminals by getting them to confess to their murderous plans by pretending to be a hitman. The whole joke with the movie is that hitmen don't really exist. It's kind of a fake thing that movies have put upon society, so people are really willing to believe that someone's a hitman when they quote meet one. This setup leads to all the different characters and costumes that Glen wears, kind of in a montage format. We see him busting people, but then 30 minutes in, he meets Adria Arjona's Maddie character, who wants to kill her abusive husband. And of course, that's where the movie really takes off. Unsurprisingly, these two develop an attraction for each other, and Gary's stuck in a mistake of his own making where he is falling in love with someone, but she is in love with a different identity. She is in love with one of his fake identities, Ron, and Ron is really different than the real Gary. Gary's more reserved, a bit more nerdy and quirky, but Ron is kind of the stereotypical, more machismo, charismatic, quote, Glen Powell that we think of. And I have to say, it is hilarious that they tried in the beginning to make Glen Powell this kind of social, not outcast, but not a popular guy. He's single, he's a cat person, he's just kind of doing his own thing, and no one really likes to hang out with him. It's no matter how hard you try, Glen Powell is just effortlessly handsome. He's just a really attractive man. It's kind of impossible to convince anyone otherwise. Classic, suspension of disbelief in movies. But the movie really picks up once you understand Gary's predicament. But you also, I think, really believe it because they have great chemistry. Obviously, they're a beautiful couple, but they're really great together. Then, of course, we see that they meet the ex-husband unwittingly. You see how much of a dick he is, and then the big kind of surprise, finding out that the husband was killed, finding out again that Maddie was the one who killed him, and then Gary/Ron decide to help cover it up. The movie just keeps taking twists and turns and kind of ratchets up the tension and the drama. I feel like most of the beats you can kind of see coming, but the execution is really quite strong and quite satisfying as you watch it play out. I didn't really mind that. I kind of predicted a lot of the beats. Jasper from the police department, the undercover cop who Gary had taken his job from when Jasper was put on lead. Jasper sniffs it out. He kind of been onto things for a while. Another thing you kind of saw coming, but I really like how it resolves at the end. There's really just a bunch of standout scenes, whether it's the ending scene in terms of what gets resolved with Jasper, whether it's Gary getting Maddie out from under police suspicion by aiding her, by using phone cues and stuff. Excellent scene. When Mike, the husband, wants to kill Maddie and Ron, and they have the back-to-back conversation before Gary decides to show his face to him. Really great. That kind of like deception. It's just fun stuff to be with, right? And I think you really believe the chemistry, you believe the relationship, you believe the attraction. You buy that Gary is willing to uproot and risk his life and go out on the limb to protect Maddie and get her out from under this predicament, because she did in fact kill her husband. So ultimately, I think it's just a really satisfying film, one of the most broadly entertaining Richard Linklater films in several years, probably since Everybody Wants Them, honestly. Linklater needs no introduction, of course. He's been incredibly prolific really throughout his whole career, and this is very much in line with how he's been moving, where he's really kind of decamped to his local Texas and really operates and works out of there, and actually co-wrote this movie with Glen Powell, his fellow Texan. Glen Powell has also moved back to live and work in Texas, and this feels very much a piece of the Linklater, catalog these days. I think it's one of his best movies. Apart from after the obvious stuff like the Before trilogy and Dazed and Everybody Wants Them, I think Hitman's a real banger, honestly. And it's actually, I didn't even realize this, but it's not the first movie that Richard Linklater has adapted from a Texas Monthly article written by Skip Hollandsworth. Very specific. A Skip Hollandsworth article was also adapted for his movie Bernie about 13, 14 years ago. And the fact that the Gary Johnson story is actually based in truth, kind of funny. Also, I got to shout out Austin Amello, who plays Jasper. I thought he was really great. He had a small role in Everybody Wants Him as well. I liked him a lot. Retta and Sanjay Rao as people at the police department, pretty fun. Like Hitman, despite having, I think, some detective lean, it's really good on laughs overall. There's some funny stuff in here. It's pretty light on its feet. And in the end, it really brings home the romantic elements. So I was really satisfied with it. And it's one of those movies that, like, we say this a lot, obviously, but it's one of those movies that really would have benefited from a theatrical play, just because I think it's a broadly crowd-pleasing film that being watched in a crowd would have done well. And I would just be curious, obviously it's completely unknowable, how this movie would have done post Anyone But You in terms of affirming Glen Powell's stardom, so to speak. This movie without the involvement of Sydney Sweeney, without the involvement of Tom Cruise, how would this movie have done? I guess in a certain sense, we will find that out next month with Twisters. So eager to talk about that. Of course, make sure you let me know, leave a comment. How did you like Hitman? What was your favorite moment about it? And for more movie reviews, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.